Welcome back to Recharging the Human Battery Radio. My name is Dr. Stefano Sinicropi. I will be your solo host today. We are on AM 950 radio. I've been gone for a couple weeks, but I haven't been gone on, I would say it's pleasure because I had an amazing time recently at the Society for Brain Mapping annual convention, is 22nd Annual Neurotech Convention out in L.A., and I'm going to spend actually the show talking about some of the insights that I was able to pull from there. It was an amazing meeting, but I'll just tell you a little bit about the background. So the Society for Brain Mapping and Therapeutics is an organization that was founded by a doctor named Babak Kateb. And Dr. Kateb is a neurosurgeon by trade, and he really identified the need for let's just say, the broadening of our horizons as far as brain, spine, pain management, regenerative medicine, all these things, and to bring all of these different topics together under one roof and to have people collaborating from all over the world to make that happen. My interest in the Society for Brain Mapping, when they first reached out to me, I didn't know much about it, but then started becoming involved in the organization a little bit more peripherally as they were doing some incredible fundraising for multiple organizations across the country in brain-related diseases and spine and regenerative medicine and interventional care, all kinds of things. And I had the opportunity to go down with them last year to Washington, D.C., to lobby for just a very broad number of different causes. My particular topic that I was lobbying on was the use of light therapy or photobiomodulation more broadly in the medical community, and really trying to get CMS to cover this because this is something that really can democratize healthcare. But there was everything from military medicine discussed there to epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, brain tumors, spinal conditions, all kinds of issues that we were able to go out there and lobby in D.C. Eventually, I became the co-chair of the spine division of the Society for Brain Mapping, and we just had our first annual conference, for my first annual conference for me, I should say, 22nd annual conference, and it was a great opportunity to bring together some of the leading spine surgeons in the country and some from out of the country that were already associated with the group. But I brought kind of a different flavor to this event, and we were able to pull it off successfully. It was an amazing event. It was an amazing awards gala where there was really thanks paid to people who had either donated to the organization, patients who had come through the organization and have had incredible outcomes and now want to donate their time. There were some music stars there that performed that have very close connections to the organization. It was just an amazing weekend, and I want to talk about some of the things that came out of there, because I want you to see that when you put together these brilliant people from all over the world in very different specialties, all of a sudden connections start getting made between all these different things. And out of the Society for Brain Mapping meetings, literally publicly traded companies have been born from collaborations that have been made at these events. And so it's something that I'm going to be a very strong advocate for. We are going to be traveling here in a couple months back to Washington, D.C. I'm very excited because I'm going to get to interview some politicians and some other things as part of our event that we put on. But on the other side of the break, we're going to get into some of the kind of the things that I've learned that I can bring to you that might either could be of interest, can help direct you in one direction or another, but really can tell you what we are doing outside of our traditional everyday practices to make the world a place where these information technologies, these medical advances can be brought out to the public. And it's more complicated than you might think. And we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. So we will see you here in a minute. We're on AM 950 radio. This is Recharging the Human Battery. right, folks, welcome back. We're on the other side of the break. We're on AM 950 radio. This is Recharging the Human Battery. I'm Dr. Stefano Sinicropi, and just back from LA and fired up. Like I was saying on the other side of the commercial break, this Society for Brain Mapping event, it was really special. It was my first event there, and I got to kind of wear two hats at this event, which was really awesome for me personally. Very, very I didn't sleep, but other than that, it was an incredible event. So not only was I the co-chair of the spine division, so was able to run the segments, just make sure that, try to get the speakers on time, try to facilitate speaker sessions when we discussed a lot of just different topics among spine surgeons, neurosurgeons, in my groups. Was able to attend some other lectures, amazing lectures on stem cells and other things. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I was able to give a keynote presentation on the future of regenerative medicine, which was really an honor for me. But the really fun part for me personally, as I'm sitting here, doing a radio station, you guys know I have a podcast. I was able to do 9 podcasts when I was out there with some really amazing people. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But the highlight of the event for me personally, and you'll see some of these clips on my socials, which some people are going to say, what in the world is this guy doing? But I had the opportunity of doing my best Ryan Seacrest impersonation out there. So I was the interviewer on the red carpet. So I got to interview this artist named Kiza, who was very big about 10 years ago. She's actually a brain injury survivor. And if you look at her one of her videos has 314 million views. Got to interview her on the red carpet. Got to interview a couple of other, pretty famous people, and got to interview doctors and patients and all these people and students and asking them about why they're there. It was just really fun. That was when you really get to, kind of unbutton your shirt and just have a great time amongst your peers. So that was just an awesome opportunity for me personally, but it was an even better show of force where people came from all over the world. I don't know how many countries were represented, but it was dozens and dozens of countries coming together to really share and collaborate on different ideas. So one of the things that is really unique about the Society for Brain Mapping, as opposed to most of the other conferences that I go to that are very specific to my specialty, it's very, very broad. And so very rarely do you get to be around people of all kinds of backgrounds. So just to give you just a little favor, I mean, I was able to see lectures on epilepsy. Obviously, I was involved in all the spine, lectures because that was my room. Stem cell, lectures. Integrative reflex medicine, which was something that was completely new to me, and I got to interview some really interesting people on that particular subject. We had lectures on light therapy, photobiomodulation, both for the body and for brain health. I had Dr. Theodore Henderson there. I had Dr. Scott Sigmund, and it was something where you'd have research optometrists and ophthalmologists and neurosurgeons, neuroscientists, orthopedic spine surgeons, physical therapists, you name it, occupational therapy, people that are just interested. You know what I ran into too? I ran into a lot of patients. Unfortunately, I did so many interviews out there. I ran out of time to get too many patients through the interview loop, but was able to connect with them. I'm going to have them on my podcast to discuss their stories. Some really fascinating stories out there. But nonetheless, when you get a collaborative group like we had, the different types of ideas that were being thrown back and forth. So just one example, which I'll talk about in a minute, but Dr. Loring, who is a Jean Loring, and you can look her up. She's a PhD. She's a world-renowned stem cell researcher. She's currently at the Scripps Institute. Was able to go to her lecture, and it was just interesting because when her research was presented, it's really fascinating to see what they're doing. I'll talk about that in a second as I go through some of the researchers and kind of what I learned and some little nuggets and just bringing out to you information that you might have never heard of. But interestingly, after that lecture, the discussion became, why is her organization not working with the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's organization, since they're doing such great work. How do we get that collaboration going? So out of that, all these different things were going, and people were like, oh, I'm familiar with this, I'm familiar with that, and other organizations that are doing Parkinson's. Because one of the things that happens with these organizations like the cancer societies and all these others, the problem is they're all doing great work, but they, like we talk a lot about on this show, they get into their silos. And so, the Michael J. Fox organization, they tend to, focus on X kind of research for Parkinson's, and another organization might focus on that, on another thing like STEM, and another organization might focus on some other part of Parkinson's. How do we collaborate amongst these organizations to really do that? And that's what comes out of the Society for Brain Mapping. So, for example, next year we're going to have a lot more on stem cell therapies, and may do an entire track just on stem cell and regenerative medicine, which is going to bring even more renowned experts together, all sitting around and saying, hey, how does everybody collaborate together to push it forward? Then out of that, what you do is you see which nonprofits are doing what for-profits are doing what is industry doing, and then you can have a more cohesive approach when it comes to making policy. And a lot of policy has been shaped by what the Society for Brain Mapping is doing. And it's really fascinating because you can have the smartest people in the world and they can come up with these incredible things, but if they can't get funding, and if we can't put in policies that allow these things to even be spread to the public, it doesn't go anywhere. And that's why it has been so frustrating for me as an outsider to watch this, because we hear about these great research results and then we're wondering 12 years later, nobody's even getting it, other than like these little studies, nobody's getting treatments. So how do we start fast tracking some of these things? So it's really an honor and a privilege for me to be part of this organization, and I'm going to get more and more involved as I help them. And again, I'm really excited about going down to DC and not only functioning as a lobbyist for the Society for Brain Mapping, but now also being in a position where they're going to have me doing podcasting there. So I'm really hoping to get hopefully we can get a couple prominent senators and some representatives to sit down with me, because I really want to drill down into, that's great. I'm glad you support it. You can come here, you smile. We talk about stem cells. That's amazing. You smile, you get a picture with a bunch of people, and then 10 years later, nothing happens. And guess what? We could have helped millions of people, but we haven't pushed anything forward. So what we need to do is, instead of, talking a lot or even doing a lot of the work, we need to take action. We need to take action. And that's why in my life, I want to be involved with organizations that are actually going to push the needle. Because otherwise, what are you doing? You're just having meetings for the sake of meetings. Everyone's excited. Everyone's happy. You go out to the after party afterwards. Everyone's like, wow, that was amazing. What an amazing talk. And then nothing happens. So we really need to bring this stuff out there. So it's going to be awesome. Can't wait to go to DC. Obviously, I'll keep you guys posted on how that all goes. That's coming up in a couple months. So let's talk about a couple of the things. So you know what? Since we started on that, let's talk a little bit. Let's talk stem cells first. I'll tell you two really interesting interviews that I had out there. So we'll start with Dr. Jean Loring, and then there's one of the people that helps her. She's a patient. Her name is Jennifer Robb, and she has Parkinson's disease. She became connected with Dr. Loring and was so excited about the work that Dr. Loring was doing, decided to become basically a chief advocate for it, is also the president of something called Summit on Stem Cells, where they do all this, they go up like Mount Everest and raise money and all these other things. But very interestingly, she helped Dr. Loring raise a lot of that initial dollars to get these projects started when there was no money, when funding had dried up. And now we are at the point where a significant landmark study is being done on utilizing stem cells to try to reverse the disorder of Parkinson's disease. So to try to reverse the tremor and all the things that come with Parkinson's disease. So let me tell you, this is really interesting stuff. This is how it works. So what they do is they take stem cells. Now, again, this Dr. Loring, world renowned, like in any stem cell circle, she's known. She's doing great stuff. She has got great collaborations with the NIH, with the FDA, and with NASA recently. I'll tell you a little bit about the NASA stuff. But what they do is they take skin cells, okay, these are dermoblasts, dermofibroblasts, and they utilize genetic engineering to convert those cells, your own cells. So for example, you can take her cells or my cells and convert them into stem cells, pluripotent stem cells, and then make them become, in this case, brain cells that work and can function like brain cells, so can produce dopamine. So once you produce that, and you have to produce a lot of them, you have to replicate the cell line, we're talking in the millions, then you take those stem cells and you drill a hole in the skull, and with a little fine needle deliver those stem cells into a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. That's where the dopamine producing cells are, and gently leave those stem cells there, and then they find a home and become more like brain cells and then start producing dopamine again. So she presented the results in mice. It's so interesting what happens and how that area of the brain regenerates. But now they have several patients enrolled in the study, and they're just about to release it. She could not tell me the results of it, only that it's really, really good, because the actual results come out here this month, actually in March. So really exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to it. And they think that if these results are so over the top, then it'll get fast-tracked by the regulatory bodies like the FDA to really jump to much bigger trials, and then on from there it could be ready potentially to be implanted in millions of people that have Parkinson's disease not too long in the future. We need to move these things along, and that's where the Society for Brain Mapping. But the really cool thing that you might find of interest is that they got a grant from NASA. So of course I had to ask her all this stuff about NASA on the podcast because it's just interesting, right? And so she got a grant from NASA to study what happens to these brain cells in space and how space affects aging. So they actually found that in space, your brain cells actually age somewhat faster. Now, this isn't a complete brain. She was able to replicate her own brain. Listen to this. She has a little mini brain. It's on the space station. Think about that. If that's not interesting, I don't know what is. So she has this brain. You have to feed this thing, and they're studying how it affects. And they found that the brain cells actually age faster, and it's going to give us potentially a glimpse into why Alzheimer's disease occurs and all these other things. But it's also going to help, with space medicine, as we obviously have aspirations on going to Mars. So, of course, I asked the question, well, if the brain is aging faster in space, that's probably not so great. So we have to figure out, do we need to give them some kind of medicines or something like that to prevent more rapid aging? Again, obviously that's early in the studies. I'm clearly not an expert in that, but just fascinating stuff. But I did have to ask her if she has visions from time to time, because part of her brain, it's not her actual brain, it's an engineered brain. But I would just joke with her that, in science fiction movies, when people do that, it usually doesn't end up amazing. So just had to get a little insight. So, she gets these questions. So we had a little fun with that stuff. So very interesting stuff. So her work, look for Dr. Jean Loring's work on stem cells, which is really, I think she's going to make the cover of Time magazine if this really does what I think, because Parkinson's disease is something that affects so many people. We've had people in our family that we've seen Parkinson's, more Alzheimer's in our family, but we've seen some Parkinson's. But almost everyone knows somebody that has some kind of Parkinson's disease or knows of somebody. So it's something that we really need to tackle. So speaking of stem cells, I was able to interview just an amazing woman. Her name is Christina, and she was one of the recipients of stem cells along her spinal cord after her spinal cord injury, and she had her stem cells done at Mayo Clinic right down the road from us. And I'm a huge proponent of utilizing stem cells to decrease inflammation, and I think it's going to be incredible in spinal cord. So there's studies both out of Yale and out of Mayo. They're small studies. She was one of the patients that show really significant improvements if you put stem cells next to the injured part of the spinal cord. Now, in the future, it's going to be very clear that the earlier you deliver the stem cells to that area, the better recovery you're going to get. Now, Christina had her stem cells put in It's the craziest thing. So she found out about the study pretty late. They were like looking all around. She was enrolled in the study one day before her 1-year anniversary from her injury. They were able to push it through because the criteria in that study was you had to be within 1 year, because technically you're still on the early side. When I say early treatment, I mean like days, like immediately, something like that, as fast as we can. But that we'll save that for another discussion. But let me tell you Christina's story, which is really fascinating. So she was having a normal day, and she was having a great day with her friends and was out in a parking lot. And she just happened to be standing on the 3rd floor, and she was on the edge. And again, these things happen in milliseconds, and we all hear stories, right? We have, if you watch the news, you're going to always hear some crazy thing that happens. She fell backwards off of a 4th story directly onto her head and was immediately paralyzed. So she had multiple fractures in her neck. Apparently, she was conscious through this whole thing. She doesn't remember it at all. She's got some amnesia. The first thing she remembers is waking up in the hospital. Technically, but again, she was told that she was awake and talking. She just doesn't remember any of it. But the only thing she could do is shrug her shoulders. That's it. She has just a little flicker of shoulder shrug, but really wasn't able to use her arms at all. And so at that time, she was considered what we'd say a C4. So we do the levels by so C4 is above. So so your deltoids, which are controlled by C5. So she was a C4, which means that even her deltoids were hardly working, maybe a little flicker, and that's it. And so then eventually she underwent and she talks about her heart-wrenching story about how hard it was, and even talked about that she was asking about assisted suicide, and whether there was somewhere she could go to legally, take her own life, because she's like, I want to live a vibrant life, and I'm not going to be able to do it. And this happens with a lot of spinal cord injury survivors, because you don't know what to do at the beginning, and it takes a lot of counseling and, a lot of support and things like that. But eventually she kind of got out of that dark hole. And again, she still wasn't moving anything at that time, but she started having some improvement in her a little bit here, a little bit there, and finally was able to see the light a little bit and had great parents that were supporting her. It's a great story. Please go and watch the podcast when it's released, the Wellness at the Speed of Light podcast, which you'll see her story, and it's pretty heart-wrenching. She's just an amazing person, but she ended up getting stem cells at Mayo Clinic. I believe, I didn't ask her the exact number, but I think I've asked her before because she does a lot with the society. I believe she was patient number 6 enrolled in that, and she was able, so now she has function down to her biceps and a little bit of hand function. And so it's a dramatic improvement. So she lives independently. She moved away from her home state. She lives in California. And, she's doing really well and has a zest for life, and is out there and has, things custom made for her and this and that, and is able to be very active and very vibrant, and really trying to help spinal cord injury survivors, kind of wrap their heads around it mentally, and she's doing great things. You can also find her story on the Society for Brain Mapping website she is a testament, because she ended up having a lot of these treatments through reaching out to the Society for Brain Mapping and then being put in the right direction. And so if people do have any kind of neurologic disorder or brain tumor or spine thing, please reach out to the Society for Brain Mapping. There are tens and tens of thousands of scientists that are somehow, collaborating with the society that you can have access to. So it's just a great place to go to. And like I said, it's such an honor for me to be affiliated with an organization I hadn't heard of. And I'm going to do my best to spread the message around, because again, Christina would have never gotten those stem cells if it wasn't for getting that information, because it's not easy to find this stuff. And it's really frustrating, for people, because they're told, well, what are you going to do? And but yet there is help out there. So I think that the next just general, topic that I, would talk about, what I was fascinated about is I got to interview a bunch of mostly some ortho guys, but there was a theme amongst some of the neurosurgeons that I interviewed. And again, I was asking them, what are they doing with their life, and the usual stuff, and how they're associated, and really cool stuff about them personally. But one of the overarching themes, and this is something that we talk, it's just interesting how, because that is such a demanding and grueling field, and they're seeing death and brain injuries and taking out tumors, it's really a life and death kind of profession. One of the things that comes out of it is when you're first practicing, you become so immersed, and this happens too, this happened in my career too, you get so immersed with practicing, becoming the best neurosurgeon or orthopedics or whatever people's specialties are, that you almost get lost in that. So you're working these crazy hours, you're doing all this other stuff, and your own life kind of takes a back seat to all this. And that sometimes is a good thing, because you have to be great at what you do, and you have to help people, and you have to, prevent, at first, do no harm. So we want to be as best as we can be. But what really fascinated me is that these folks, almost everybody I interviewed, when they got around like midlife, they all began to have these epiphanies about how it's not just about the physical stuff, like taking out a brain tumor or fixing an aneurysm or fixing a spine or whatever. There is so much spirituality that comes along with this stuff. And they themselves, so many of them have become so much more spiritual, not religious necessarily, spiritual. So incorporating spirituality and understanding, there's and people interpret it in a different way. There's a source. Like, this stuff can't just be because of whatever. And again, there's a lot of people that, and again, even in this conference, because I talk to people from all walks, staunchly religious people to staunch atheists. But it's interesting, when you're in these fields and you're around life and death all the time, all of a sudden you start seeing like a beauty in a different way of life and how fragile it is. And there's a spirituality that starts coming in. And even the people that were, I did interview somebody that just said, actually, Dr. Wagner, great guy from Brazil, because now I say we, because I'm part of the organization, but does a lot with the Brazilian society. Really excited. I'm really excited, by the way, for going and giving some talks in Brazil. I think that's going to happen in 26. But anyway, just talked about how, even though like religion is not a big part of his own, he's in Brazil, which is very, religious and very religious, actually, and has some other, interesting beliefs, but has become so spiritual, so because it is so important how the mind kind of correlates with all this stuff. So it's changed the way they practice, it's changed the way they approach patients. And it's such a beautiful thing to see, because I also went through the kind of a similar, transformation myself. I had Dr. Haridas, who was the current president, and he's the outgoing president now. Dr. Hussein is the new president incoming, both neurosurgeons. But Dr. Haridas talked about his own transformation and how he is from the Indian culture, and so he's very used to kind of the spirituality, but how much more his own values have come into order, and how much more spiritual he is, and how much more he believes in this kind of source that gives life to all things. And again, we all say it differently. I like source because that's something that Oprah uses, right? She says it's the source. There's something holds this all together, because just this is an aside, something that kind of gives me goosebumps when I talk about it. But you know what scientists haven't figured out? They figured out all kinds of formulas. They figured out all kinds of other stuff. Now quantum mechanics is looking at things obviously from a totally different thing. You know what no one can answer? Why everything just doesn't fall apart. Like, no, that can't be answered. It's like, why? I get it. You have formulas, whatever, but they don't explain why everything is the way it is, why things just don't go into complete chaos, and just like, why does everything just explode? We don't know. Yes, we could talk about bonds and how different atoms bond to each other and then they make molecules and so on from there, but that doesn't explain it. It doesn't. It's kind of like the whole, that theory of everything. Like there's no one's come up with what's the theory of everything. How does everything work? And so there's this thing, there's some energy force. Whether some people think of it as a being, some people it's just a source. It's hard to explain, right? It's above my pay grade. I don't know. I'm a human. I don't know what's going on. But I do know. I agree with all these people that the more you see the beauty in it, more you see death, the more you see miracles, the more you see, people going through things that are so horrible and then yet making a comeback. You say there's something else to this. It was beautiful to see, because And you'll see that. Watch some of the interviews. You'll just see, like, you don't expect, one surgeon interviewing another surgeon, and we're going on crazy tangents about spirituality and the source and the quantum realm, and how that all, plays into it, all that. So it's just incredible, to see people's personal transformations. That's something I'm interested in. And I think the more we transform as physicians, as people that are in it can be rough. It's tough, to deal with all this stuff, but making these transformations really helps people with their burnout, because you're part of a higher calling, a higher purpose. There's more to it than just this transactional, there's somebody in front of me, let's fix their whatever they have. So really, really, really interesting to see. So that was what I got, and that obviously that's not probably what you're expecting me to say. You might say, we talked about glioblastomas or whatever. Yes, we talked about all these different, tumors and things and what the latest research is and stuff, but that's not the heart. I want to bring stories to you guys that are very different, so that you can see, like, the interconnectedness of humanity and how we're kind of all in this together. We're all figuring it out. In a way, we're all lost, but the more we bond together, we feel that camaraderie of our fellow humans, and we can make this a special place. And hearing that from, world-renowned neurosurgeons, you don't hear that every day. And I want to bring that out, and that's the stuff that really inspires me to do a lot of this media stuff. So next thing, of course, I have to go there because I had two, renowned guys on the podcast out there in LA. It's photobiomodulation. So I had the privilege of having Dr. Theodore Henderson as one of my podcasts. Again, these will all be released over the next couple of, probably over the next 4 or 5 weeks. There's a lot of them, so we'll try to get them out pretty quick. But Dr. Theodore Henderson is a psychiatrist. He's in that psychiatry world. He does a lot with SPECT scanning. He's very well published. Me and him actually just published a white paper together talking about, the power of laser therapy over just regular light therapy for penetrating the brain. That's a whole aside, but got to really pick his brain about the work that he's doing. So he takes care of a lot of ex-NFL players, a lot of military, a lot of vets. He takes care of some current NFL players, but a lot of his clients are outside that, because in the NFL it's a little bit different. They try to keep things tight to the vest. He does have some, but again, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about now. But the power of light treatments for brain conditions, this was our discussion. This is something I'm really passionate about. We're seeing improvements in Parkinson's disease. We're seeing improvement in Alzheimer's disease. We're seeing tremendous improvements in concussion and TBI. It can be used for so many different manifestations of brain disorders. And when I talk to these guys, of course, I'm going to pick, I'm just going to kind of pick out what their frustrations are in why these technologies are not being offered broadly. Again, right, we have this big neurotech convention. There are some of the therapeutics, which again are saving lives, no question, are very expensive to the system, very expensive to the system. And then some are very necessary. There's so many rare genetic disorders, and there's all kinds of things where you just have to spend a lot of money to help people. However, there are things like light therapy which can help to democratize medicine. Why? Because if you think about light therapy, we could easily bring a lot of light therapy to third world countries and do it in an economic fashion. Think about the amount of dollars that we send to these countries. Why are we not spending it on economical treatments to help their populations with diseases that they cannot afford, right? So, for example, you're not going to get a deep brain stimulator, okay, which is common here in the United States for a movement disorder if you're in a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa. It's just not going to happen. It's not even a thing, right? And so this is a problem. So why are we not bringing extremely low-cost technologies like light therapy to those areas? Why don't people know about these things? So we just kind of went back and forth because we're both frustrated about it. And again, not medical advice, but these are things that can really help people to improve their lives pretty dramatically. And so Dr. Theodore Henderson, just brilliant guy, well-written. I encourage you to look him up and what he's all about. And then I had my buddy, Dr. Scott Sigman, a.k.a. The Fro, who is a renowned orthopedic surgeon out of the Boston area. who is the CEO and founder of Ortho Laser, which is a franchise across the country which provides laser therapy for musculoskeletal conditions. And you guys know we do this in our clinics, and it's really, yeah, I can't speak enough about how powerful the laser is for musculoskeletal conditions. But I always love sitting down with Dr. Sigmund because he is a polished podcaster himself. We've done 2 podcasts. We did the Home and Away show. He was on my podcast. That was on his podcast. And when we get together, you know, he calls us the Laser Bros or whatever. And he really cool. But it was amazing to have him and Dr. Henderson in the same room. I mean, this is royalty we're talking about. And so now out of that, having the opportunity to have all these people kind of get to know each other and in the same room, you know, we're planning to do a webinar with people that are really interested in photobiomodulation that can really get the message out and really, you know, push that webinar so people are listening to, you know, people that know what they're talking about. And I want to get those guys, and I also want to bring Dr. Casano and Dr. Michael Hamlin, you know, 2 of the world's foremost researchers on brain treatments with light therapies, all in one room to discuss how we can make impacts. Like, for example, how do we get our information out to Alzheimer's societies? We're talking about collaboration, to Parkinson's groups, to traumatic brain injury survivors and the groups that they work with. Again, these are the reason I'm so passionate about it is we're not sitting here. Yes, and are there medicines that people need? Yes, but that's not what that topic is about, right? This is low cost, extremely low-risk treatments that can make an impact. And so pushing these things pretty aggressively, it's helping a lot of people, and it's not hurting anybody. So these are things that really we need to collaborate on. We need to push and push and push on these things. I mean, just there is so much potential. I cannot emphasize what the potential is for light and laser therapy treatments for the brain. And I have a TED Talk coming up at Harvard in, so I'll give you the exact date because it's all official, on April 26th, TEDx at Harvard. And I talk about light and laser therapy and how it's going to revolutionize some medical care. Again, it's adjunct to other treatments. It's not nothing is the answer to everything, right? But the way I start that is I discuss a patient that we had in our clinics who had 9 months of concussion symptoms, was crying, could hardly get his words out, was slurring his speech. And I said, listen, I know that you're not familiar with this. Why don't we try these treatments on you? After his first treatment, he was able to not slur his words. It was the first time he was coherent in 9 months. These are his words. I'm not putting this is what he said. But he was so emotional about the fact that he was actually able to verbalize his talk, not have to speak slowly. You know, kind of he felt like his brain was woken up, that he made the entire staff cry. This was in our Maple Grove location. That powerful story is the way that I open up my TED Talk on April 26th. Why do I open it up that way? Because without hearing those patient stories, I could talk about science for 10 hours and you could care less. You want to know, like, well, tell me what happens when you do this stuff. What we do need to do, though, is really broaden the amount of studies that are out here, and that's where the Society for Brain Mapping comes and the fundraising and all these other things, because we do need broader studies, because the general medical population is not, even though this is really safe stuff, that's been proven, is not going to really push this heavily until those studies are funded. And I can tell you that NIH funding for these like lower level therapies is very poor, and we are going to lobby our butts off to get money in for these really good causes. And so On the other side of the break, we'll close it up with some other little nuggets that I picked up from that conference. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully it just stimulates you to go out there, see what the Society for Brain Mapping is all about, look at the great things that they're doing, look what other organizations are doing. I love organizations that are out there making an impact and making a difference. We'll see you on the other side of the break. This is AM 950 Radio, Recharging the Human Battery. I'm Dr. Stefano Sinicropi. Talk in a minute. All right, welcome back to this last little segment of Recharging the Human Battery Radio. Thanks for sticking with us. We're here on AM 950 Radio. I'm Dr. Stefano Sinicropi, and I could not be more fired up about coming back from this Society for Brain Mapping meeting where I got to really interact with brilliant people from all over the world. It's just amazing. The more you talk to people, the more it stimulates ideas, the more you figure out, like, what are we doing? Like, what are they doing in Brazil? What's going on in Ecuador? What are they doing in Japan about this? How do they feel about stuff? How do cultural backgrounds influence the way that people think about certain things? So, for example, one of the things I love to talk about is spirituality, meditation, deep breathing. When you talk to somebody from Asia about that stuff, they're like, yeah, I was doing that when I was 7. Like, it's normal to them. When you talk to some people in America, yeah, maybe they heard it casual. Not everybody. Trust me, there's people that are very into yoga and all these other things. But most people, they don't really know a lot about it. They don't understand what the biochemical reactions that happen in the body that can stimulate just tremendous changes in our physiology and really help us. So it's this combination of the physical and spiritual that can have a huge impact. So it's so interesting to see how different people interpret different things and how different ideas take off, and not only in different countries, but in different pockets of the United States. Because if you look at certain things, like, for example, stem cell therapies are way more common on the coast and in the South than they are in the Midwest. Things like it's just interesting to see how different ideas get thrown around. And the other thing is, and again, I don't want to get deep into the weeds, but as me personally, having the opportunity to serve as a co-chair and bringing in these speakers and having other speakers that the other co-chair brought in, again, from all over the world, really having these stimulating discussions with my co-surgeons in my specialty, and then bringing in thoughts about things that I'm doing and they're doing outside of traditional medicine. It's really interesting because sometimes we think that we're the only ones that are thinking outside the box. And then you go to a conference like this and people are thinking outside the box. But the cool thing is they're thinking outside the box in a very different way. You're thinking outside the box. And then you say, wait a minute, I'm doing this. You're doing that. They're both working. Why don't we put those two things together and see how we can, build, collaborate. And so the amount of collaborations that I had, so I have to return so many, texts and emails now because we all want to collaborate with each other. So everybody's really excited. And to be honest with you, you got to strike while the iron is hot, because then we go back to our normal lives. We have really busy weeks of surgery and doing whatever we're going to do. And next thing you know, it fades and then you don't see them until the next meeting. So hopefully I stimulated you guys in whatever profession you're in, wherever you are, to go outside of your own silos, your own box. Go to these meetings, whatever you're involved in. If you're like the spiritual healer, if you're an athlete, if you're whatever, go to these. There are so many societies and they're doing amazing things. Go there, learn all you can. We've got one at bat at this thing. Why would we not want to pick things that we really love and go all in and learn everything we can with this little short life that we've been given? That's how we're going to push forward, make humanity better, make this a better place. There's a lot of misery and suffering out here. It's been like that, by the way, since the beginning of time. But how do you make it better? By collaborating with your fellow man, by being great to each other, by helping each other, by healing. And sometimes healing is just like listening to your neighbor because they're in a bad spot. That itself can be a healing conversation. So next time We will talk maybe about a couple of the other interviews, get back into our hardcore health and wellness and how you can be CEOs of your own healthcare. Thanks for joining us today. This is Recharging the Human Battery Radio. I'm Dr. Stefano Sinicropi, and as always, we are here on AM 950 Radio, bringing you the latest in health and wellness on this program. Have a wonderful day.